a bracelet with a loop at one end and some little mini braids at the other end that can make kind of an instant little bracelet, or in this case a decoration for my teapot. This is going to be another demonstration of a bicolor mixed, a square braid with chevrons over bicolor stripes. I already demoed how to make this braid, the braiding part, and now I'm going to show how to set it up with a loop start and no loose ends, and hopefully a way to finish it off to make a nice little bracelet that has a loop at the top that can become a fastening mechanism and a pretty end. And I demoed this in, I think in still pictures on my blog, in the blog post called Longer Loop Braids, what I call a handshake loop start. And this is I'm going to have to move the camera. The blue and white bunch of loops there are how you would set it up with single colored loops. You would make, here it's hard for it to fit in front of the camera, but you would make the loops that would start out on the left hand. They wouldn't have to all be blue, I just did that to make it easier to see. Tied into each one into a separate loop. The knots are in this braid would end up being at your fingertips when you braid, and then the loops that will start out on the right hand are looped through that bunch of loops before being tied into separate knots at the end. Each of these off-white loops is a separate loop. They aren't tied together. Then when you start braiding, you actually start braiding a small, you can just use the off-white loops as a header cord, actually temporarily. You can put that onto, tie that onto some kind of firm fixed object. Just tip that back so you can see it. Then you would braid a short distance out with these happen to be 4 loops, making a 4-loop square braid. Braid a short distance out, put it down in a holder. I use a comb. Then you would turn it around, make this be the header cord, the blue loops, or whatever way you want. You can also tie an actual header cord onto there. And yeah, this would be the header. And braid outward a short distance with the off-white loops, a very short distance. These are 3 loops. And then you would just put a header cord. You could start with a header cord through them. Then you just join them, the two, and braid together. And you have a loop at the top. Well, that's a great way to start a braid with a loop at the top and no loose ends at the top with single color loops. But when you're using bicolor loops, it's a little trickier. And you can't make a simple loop, bunch of loops like this with bicolor loops, because one half of the loop has to be one color and one half the other color. However, you can do it if you have an even number of bicolor loops in this manner. So I'm going to be making a braid that has 4 bicolor white or off-white and blue loops, 2 single color black loops, and 1 single color orange, well, it's kind of reddish loop. And I'll show you how to do that. You cut the lengths out all exactly the same length. These are 29 inches, which might be a little generous for a bracelet. I don't know. I left a little extra. Then my 2, these are double length. They're twice as long as you want your loops to be. So then I'm going to put my bicolor loop lengths together. So here are my 4 lengths that will be bicolor loops. I'm going to tie each one together at the ends, forming these 2 doubly long off-white and blue loops, or blue strands, are going to become 1 doubly long loop, which I'm going to bend in half to make 2 loops. So that pair is tied. Tie the next pair. There are ways to, if you have an odd, if you don't have an even number of bicolor loops, you can either have two ends. You will either have two ends hanging out at the top that you can kind of bury with a needle and thread, with a needle later into the braid, or there are some ways to, well, not with an odd number of bicolor loops. You would have two ends at the top. But we're going to see there will be an odd single color loop here. Okay, then the two single color black loops will be this one doubly long length. And the reason that I cut two lengths to tie together at both ends rather than one length twice as long as this is that the knots take up they take up some length, and so this is an easier way to measure it to be exactly the same as the bicolor loops. It's easier just to measure the same length and tie these together too, even though this is one long loop and you might think you could just bend it in half and tie one end. That will end up being a longer, loop. Okay, and then there's going to be one odd, just one orange loop. I'm going to wait to tie that. The first thing I'm going to do is think about which loops I'm going to start on my left hand and my right. And I think I'll start, it doesn't really matter, but I think I'm going to start with the 4 bicolor loops on my left hand, and I'll have the 2 black and the 1 tomato red loop on my right hand. So I'll take the loops that will be on my left hand, double them over like that, and then I will take the loops that are going to be on my right hand and thread them through those doubled over loops. Okay, so there's the black, doubly long black loop. It has now become 2 loops, doubled through. The single tomato colored loop I haven't tied yet. The other ones are tied. This one is not tied. I'm going to put it through the left hand loops and tie it. It's now tied around there. So this is the only one that, this tomato red or orangey loop is the only one that's similar to these. It's tied into a loop around the other bunch of loops. None of the other loops are tied around each other. They're doubled over around each other. Okay, so this is ready to go. I have these will be, let's see, the bicolored ones will be 4 loops on the left hand, and these will be two black loops and 1 tomato red loop on the right hand. However, I'm not going to start that way. I'm going to start by braiding a short length of just 4 loop braid with these loops, and a short length distance of just black and red loops on this side with these. And I think I will use a header cord because I'm thinking about when I put them together that will be easier. So I'm going to make a header cord. Here's my length. This will just tie this into a loop, and I'm going to string it through both bunches of loops. It has to go through both, so make sure that it does. It's longer than what I need. This would be good for tying around something like a back of my chair, so I'm going to shorten it up. I'm just going to be dropping this over the handle of my C-clamp. That's my header cord. So I guess I'll start with the blue and white loops. I'll set this up. And basically just ignore my red and black loops and start with these. Put them on. Let's make them not too tangly. It doesn't really matter that much. I'm going to put them on my fingers. It's going to be a 4 loop braid, so I start with 2 in one hand, 2 on the other. Doesn't really matter which go to which fingers, but then I'll think about my pattern. park these for a minute and arrange the camera. I'm trying to block some light from coming in there. Okay, so now I'm ready to braid a 4-loop braid. I think I'll try do it with the edge pattern. So I'll have the blue shanks up on the left end and the pink shanks up on the right end. This really doesn't matter. I just figure I'll do it that way. I'll pull the orange and black loops out of the way. So now to make a 4-loop braid, I'm just going to do a short length of it. To make a 4-loop square braid, it'll be an odd braid. It's fine to do those. So you start by going through, every transfer will be turned, just through 1 loop on the left hand, shift, tighten. I'm going to tighten fairly hard on the first few rounds, and through 2 loops on the right side, take it with a turn, shift, tighten, through 1, shift, tighten, and through 2. I should be counting my cycles, although it's also fine to eyeball it. So the orange and black loops are kind of messed up in there. I'm just going to pull them tight out of the way because I want these first, few tightening moves to be fairly tight because I'm tightening around. I want to make a nice, firm, tight I call this a handshake start, handshake clasp around the bunch of orange and black loops. So, and I should probably be counting my cycles, but I can't do that and talk to you at the same time very well, I've noticed. So here we go. I have other tutorials that show how to make smaller square braids like this, so I'm not going to go particularly slowly here. It's really just like a 5-loop one, but or 3-loop one, but one less. Okay, so that's a fairly short distance. I don't know how far. Well, let's make a bigger loop than that for demonstration purposes. So, or I'm turning each transfer, and this makes my bicolor loop magic post talks about this pattern. Let's see if that's focusing the edge pattern. So there's a lengthwise striping of blue and of off-white. And now, well, that's the wrong place to put it. Here. And now, I'm going to be a little sloppy about this, I think, and just drop my loops. Here, to be neater, you would put these down on some kind of holder to keep their place. So I would put them down on a comb with just 4 or 3 loops. I am used to picking them up and figuring out their order. It won't really matter. When I join the 2 halves of this braid into one, I'm going to be doing a different braid anyway, so it doesn't really matter if these are a bit out of order. If I weren't hurrying, I would put them on a comb holder. Okay, so now I'm going to braid the, let's see if that shows. Here's the header cord. Here's the bunch of red and black loops that are looped into what I just braided, and I'm going to braid them. I'll make sure I don't include the header cord. There we go. The header cord is included, and we'll pull it out later. And I probably should have used a thinner one. It's good to use a thin but strong cord for the header cord. Since it's going through the middle of this braid, this will create somewhat of an empty space when I pull it out. It would, I think, better to use a finer thread. It probably won't show, but it's just something to think about. So now I pick up the other bunch of loops, straighten them out, and it doesn't matter if they're not perfectly aligned because you can pull them. They will pull. You can adjust their length now. And they are going to be the other half of the loop start. Okay, and I only have 3, so I'm going to make a 3-loop braid coming out the other end. It'll be a little smaller and a little finer, but that's okay. So I tighten fairly firmly. And I'm just going to eyeball the length and make it about, try to make it about the same length as the previous braid. It actually doesn't, counting the cycles probably doesn't help that much since the two braids are of different diameters. It would take more cycles of this one, the 3-loop braid, to equal the length of the thicker braid. Let's see if that's long enough. Maybe a few more. Okay, so now I'm ready. I think I would like, though, I want to start my next braid with the orange in the middle. So I'm going to do one more orange in the center. So there's black, orange, black on the right hand. Now I'm going to pick up this not very well arranged bunch of 4 loops and try and put them on my fingers without too much of a tangle at the top of the braid. Find my loops. Find the loops first and then untangle them. Luckily they're not too tangled. Okay, I have 4 bicolor loops on my other hand, my left hand. I think I need to get these out of the way. They're messing up the background. That's the header cord. Get it out of the way. And to tighten, since I could tighten that way, but I can also put my finger in between the loops and beat back to kind of tighten up any loose bits at the fell. That's the bottom of the braid. And then I'm going to look at these loops and make sure they're not too twisted. Not too, but now I'm going to decide how I want them arranged. And for the edge pattern, I want all the bicolor loops on one hand to have the same shanks up and down. So let's see, I'll just turn these. So I'll start with blue up on the left. So this one needs to be turned. Okay, and they're not too twisted. They're just slightly, let's beat the shed there, and then I'll do the same with the red and black ones, beat the shed. So this pattern, I now have 2 little mini braids at the top here, and I'm going to join them together in one unified braid, and this is the pattern that I've been planning to do, which is bicolor, half the loops, or 4 of the loops will have the bicolor edge pattern that I've already talked about, and the other 3 single color loops will be making a chevron going across the vertical bars of blue and off-white. And that chevron will be black, red, black. That's the order. Okay, so now I'll just start braiding, and I'm doing a square braid. Tighten the first few fairly tight. I can see those 2 are starting to knit it together. A little at the top. Here we go. Second cycle. Fairly firmly. Third cycle. Oh, that's not paying attention to the camera. Here we go. Fourth cycle. At halfway through the 4th cycle, the loops have all gone to the other side, and in a 7-loop braid. That's halfway through the pattern repeat. And this is a good place to check and to tighten, and maybe even take it, if you could lean forward. I can't because the camera's in front of me. Look at the join. See here, you can, since they've switched sides, you can pull apart. Often one side might be, one half might be a little longer than the other, and here you can do some little fussy tightening. Tighten, tighten, pull, pull. There's a little loose area here that if I was being really fussy about, I might go in and tweak. I'm not going to worry about it. So there's my loop at the top. It has a header cord going through it that later I'll pull out. I could pull it out now and just suspend this loop from the bar of my C-clamp, but I think it'll be too short for the This is braiding for the camera. Leave it on the header cord. Okay, so I'll tighten that a lot because they're now on opposite hands, and then I'll finish my fourth cycle. The fourth cycle. Here we go. 5. 6. And 7. This will be one pattern repeat in the braid, but so now the loops are back where I started with them. It's one pattern repeat. They've come back to the fingers where they started, and I'll do another few pattern repeats, and then we'll see what this pattern looks like. Braid. At the end of this video tutorial, I will show how to make a kind of a fun way to use that loop at the top to make a slidable fastening. It's very simple for a bracelet or many kinds of closures. It's hard to describe, but it's easy to show. So I'll show that at the end. So if you're bored with this part, you might want to skip to the end and see that where the bracelet is done. And I'm going to be, unless I decide to do it in a separate video segment, at some point I do want to show how to make this slidable fastening out of the loop. Okay, let's see. I'm halfway through. Let's finish this pattern repeat and get the orange and black loops. Oh, that was the pattern repeat. Well, a little further. Put them on the other side. It might look like I'm pulling hard, but I'm not. I'm pulling all the way in a straight line and rocking that a couple times. Okay, this is a good place to pause, take a look at our pattern. So, where should I hold that? This is the chevrons over single color loops are making the chevrons. They show on the side of the braid. I call them zigs on the top and bottom surface of the braid. It's that pattern, sort of a leaf pattern, and that connect on the sides of the braid to form the chevrons. And then, I don't know, maybe these colors were too pale to use as an example, but it is two lengthwise bands, of one of blue and one of off-white, coming down the braid. And my whole braid is going to be like this, which I just love this pattern. I think it's really a fun pattern. And at the top is the loop. Well, let me take the header cord out. This, when you're done with the braid, you could take it out or part way if you're going to put the loop on something. This is one nice way to make a loop. Start with no ends at the top of your braid. And I call it a handshake start because the two bunches of loops are kind of clasping each other like that at the top.